Hello and welcome everyone to another edition of Data Chat Live. My name is Cameron Cowan and I am your host. Along for the ride with me, as always, is my good friend Mike Fong. Say hello to everyone, Mike.
Hello, everyone. Mike.
I don't think that ever gets old. I love that. Mike, how is everything on your side of the world?
What is there to say? I don't want to talk about the weather again.
I thought that's what everyone in London does. Talk about the weather.
June was the hottest June ever, according to the meteorologists around the world. They were all in one. They were in all places measuring temperature at the same time. Yeah, things are good. We've had a busy week over here at the Observe Point EMEA office. And looking forward to today's conversation. We've got a lot of good stuff lined up.
Yeah, indeed. I was thinking about that July 1st date that we just passed, and a whole bunch of stuff in our industry kind of hit us all at once, and we'll be peppering that throughout the discussion today. But before we get too deep into that discussion, I want to bring on our special guest for the episode. Joining us today is our good friend Felice Wu. She is a head of content marketing here at Observe Point. Say hello to everyone, Felice.
Hi everyone, Felice.
Now, you're picking it up too. Very nice. Now, rather than me doing a poor job of stumbling over a bio and introduction, why don't you just give us a little bit of background, Felice, on you and your role here and where you've come along to get to this point in your career?
Yeah, so I've been at Observe Point for a couple of years now. I've been in content marketing, which means basically I've been writing blog posts, reports, emails, and case studies, and I do have a copywriting background. I've been in marketing for a long time. I won't age myself, and I do both consumer and B2B.
Awesome. Now, the reason we brought Felice in today is because we've been hard at work, and I say we, Felice has been very hard at work putting together our annual report. As many of you know, if you've been following Observe Point for a while, each year we do a report on kind of the state of the market, state of web governance, and all the different signals that we have. But we mixed it up this year and took a bit of a different approach. So you'll see 11,000 homepages. A report is the name of our episode today. Now we're just getting ready to publish the web governance report. And that's based on some very unique, very special data based on our own technology and our ability to scan just a very large number of popular and large websites across the world. Felice, why don't you talk to us a little bit about the methodology of that report and what you did to set it all up?
Yes, so the last couple of years we surveyed respondents, and we weren't seeing that much of a change year over year. Like everyone knows, they needed to do better data governance to make better decisions. Everyone knew they needed to be better at privacy, but incremental changes. So this year we really wanted to dig into the data that we could source and provide sort of a different perspective, as well as benchmarks for your industry. Let you know that you're not alone in your struggle with wrangling giant websites. So we scanned exactly 11,374 homepages, and we sourced the homepages, like the companies, from various lists like Inc. 5000, NASDAQ, UK 100, Fortune 1000, international companies. And we also did sort of a range in terms of company size. So we had a third from small, medium, and enterprise, or we tried to be as close as we could to that. And what else can I tell you? Oh, and obviously various regions, and industries.
Okay,
so
representative
regions across the world, right? As
right.
representative as we could be.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. And one of the things I love about this approach this year is that it's one thing to ask people, how are you doing? Or what do you think is happening on your website? It's another to come with specific data that says, well, this is the reality, regardless of what you think is happening. This is what we're finding as we go out and look at each one of those homepages. Now, through the course of our discussion today, we're going to be diving into some specific findings. It's certainly not everything that's in the report, more of a highlight and best of. It's a sneak preview. This report will be published shortly and sent to everybody that's joining in on the webinar today. But before we get into the specifics, I want to pop up a quick set of poll questions just to kind of prime the pump, as it were, get you thinking about some of this web governance stuff. So Ryan, if you want to share that out. Just a couple or two, three, what is it? Three questions that we
Three,
want
yeah.
people to answer here. As we're waiting for you to respond, we're seeing the responses come in right now, but what percentage of cookies on your homepage do you think are third party, or just broadly, what percentage of cookies on any homepage do you think are third party versus first? What percentage of homepages don't have a privacy policy link on them? That's kind of the low watermark, or the lowest common denominator when it comes to data privacy. So we were looking at that, and we want to see what you think that percentage comes in at for those 11,000 plus websites we looked at. And finally, what percentage of homepages have a CMP, or a consent management platform? As data privacy continues to proliferate around the world, become more important in many different markets, we definitely wanted to take a look at how people are complying with various different data privacy regulations and standards. So give us a shout out as far as how many people you think have adopted CMPs up to this point. All right, I think we have most of the responses in. I'll give it one more beat.
We'll leave the vote up, right? And then we'll come back to the results very later on in the episode. So everyone take your time, and no Google searching for the answer. This is kind of like a pub quiz. You can't cheat, right? So this is your opinion on what you think is kind of the average across these 11,000 representative homepages.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Now to set up the discussion from here on out, the report really follows kind of a framework of the types of things that the Observe Point web scanner looks at as it visits any web page. Felice, talk to us a little bit about the structure and the types of things we're looking at today.
Right. So we scan the pages, tags, and cookies of these homepages, because that's sort of how the Observe Point platform works, and that's how we talk about your analytics, your landing pages, and your privacy compliance. So that's exactly how the report is structured. We're going to start with pages, go into tags, and then into cookies and talk about privacy.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's dig in and start hitting some of these. We may have more insights than we have time to cover. I'm sure Mike and I will have color commentary along the way, but let's start with that highest level of just the pages themselves. So let's look at the first set of reports. Okay, so what are we looking at here, Felice?
Average page load times by industry. So this is just to show, depending on what industry you are, the speed of your website is really different. And what's the benchmark we want to be at for page load times?
I mean, I know in our tool, we often reference 3 seconds. That's a guideline kind of established by Google more holistically, as far as if it's under 3 seconds, that's good. The slower after 3 seconds any page takes to load, you start getting hits on things like quality score for paid ads and SEO and other things. So 3 seconds is where you want to be.
Right.
Obviously, this is an average. So there's going to be some outliers that drag it up or down, usually up in this case. But we're seeing that average somewhere between 4 and 5 seconds across these 11,000 pages. Am I reading that right?
Right. So we're not doing that great overall.
Yeah. I would say a few years ago, there was, I think it was an Amazon study showing that, customer conversion rates kind of started plateauing and then dipping around the 4-second mark. Obviously, our attention spans have got worse since. But you have to bear in mind that actually that research was probably carried out amongst kind of a digital native, maybe a more sort of Western, high tech sort of sample size. We might think that in Asia Pacific or in Latin America or maybe other parts of other continents, they might not have such fast internet speeds, right? So maybe that is where our expectation of the 3-second benchmark versus actually our kind of globally representative sample size here is that could be the difference.
Yeah. And Mike, anything stick out to you as far as the industries? We can see a couple there at the bottom that are especially not doing so well. Anything that sticks out?
Nothing sticks out to me at all, Cameron. No outliers there.
I was really surprised. I expected media to be by far the slowest. Typically, when you're looking at content pages, news websites, they have a lot to them. They take a long time to load. A lot of things are popping in and out. A lot of advertising that's involved in most of those pages. So the fact that the media isn't the slowest subset, I think the other thing that stuck out to me was the holding companies and conglomerates. Some of the biggest companies in the world don't necessarily have the biggest digital presence in the world. Is that am I reading that right? What do you guys see in there?
I feel like maybe also I mean, this could be industry bias here, but like if you're a holding company, you're not necessarily talking to consumers. So maybe you're not paying as much attention to page load time. However, that, raises the question of telecom, why they're so slow.
Well, they're usually slow in getting out to my house to set me up in the
Yes,
first place. So not to
exactly.
call anyone out by name, but just maybe that's part of it. It's industry best practice. Ugh. Okay. So that's the page load time. Now, one of the questions we get a lot of times is, well, what's impacting this load time? Is it
Right.
the number of tags? Is it the size of the page? So I think one of the next things you looked at was page size. And yes, indeed. What do we see in here?
Right. So page size, again, it's not what's interesting is not a one-to-one. The page, like the slowest guy was holding companies,
Holding companies, yeah.
but they're in the middle here, right? They're not
Yep.
at the very bottom. Very bottom is minerals and mining.
And telco was kind of in that top third. So their telecommunications were in the fastest third. So that's
Right.
interesting.
Yeah. So I guess what we're saying is that sometimes page size can impact, especially if you're one of the big outliers. I mean, here we're still only looking at 10 to 15 megabytes per page size. We've seen some web pages that are well over 100. In those cases, there probably is a very direct correlation, but it's not always one-to-one. And we need to be looking at things other than page size. Is that a fair sum up?
Yes, and it's the average wasn't that bad at 10.3 megabytes. That's actually not terrible.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to say this now because I'm going to probably want to repeat it 100 times as we go through this. Averages lie. I mean, so just because that's the average doesn't mean that's the median. That doesn't mean that that's the midpoint, because we do have some of these websites we found that were super slow or super big.
Right.
And so those are starting to pull some of those averages out. So worth calling out. A lot of times when I do my analysis, certainly the way we present data in the ObservePoint platform is not just by average, we offer that, but also by that median and kind of min-max, so you know what the range is.
Right.
All right. Was there anything else we looked at from a page perspective? There was indeed. In fact, this goes to one of the poll questions. So what are we seeing here, Felice?
So we couldn't obviously scan exactly for privacy policy because websites call the privacy policy different things, like our policy or whatever. So we searched for just the term privacy on these homepages, and we narrowed it down to just the English language websites. We took out the ones that weren't English, and we didn't find the word privacy on the homepages of about 30% of these homepages, which begs the question, like, is there not a privacy policy, or is it just completely called something else?
Yeah, so this is, I think, very directional. When you think about kind of what is, I mentioned earlier, the lowest common denominator when it comes to data privacy compliance, almost every jurisdiction in the world requires some level of privacy policy, whether you call it privacy policy, privacy notice, privacy terms. Most often that term is used in some way. So that's why we look for just privacy. That's not to say every one of these 3,300 pages that didn't have that word don't have a privacy policy, but it's a pretty good indicator that there's still some portion of the web that isn't following even that kind of low watermark. Mike, any comment on that?
Yeah, we know that pretty, around now and over the next year, with a lot of laws coming online around the world, but also stateside as well. We know around 70 to 75% of the population of the world is covered by various privacy regulations. We're talking about, PIPL, GDPR, the CCPAs, all of those different. We're just saying, those cover X% of the population. So actually, 70% of websites that we scanned, roughly 70% of the population of the world. I'm not saying that should be a match there, but I'm saying actually it seems roughly proportionate. That's my base analytics feelings, and we know that 30% of laggards they'll catch up as maybe they happen to be in a jurisdiction where a privacy notice isn't required.
Yeah. No, we definitely want to see this number tick up. Obviously, there's other factors to it, but directionally, it's getting better, but we're still not where we should be as an overall industry when it comes to web governance and privacy. All right, so that's kind of a high-level view of the pages that we looked at, and that's probably the least deep that we've gone as far as analysis.
Cameron, we should see how our pollsters there.
Oh, do you have that in the chat? I don't have that in front of me, but if you have a result to see what people thought, that'd be great.
I'm awaiting our moderator to.
There it is. There's the moderator. Okay, so it looks like the largest group of people did guess 30%. So
No, wrong question, I think.
what percentage of third
Question
party?
Number two, question number two.
Scrolling down. Privacy policy. Thank you for the adjustment. So it looks like we had guesses throughout. Those of you that guessed 30%, you were on, or to be more accurate, you were off by 0.14%. So good job for those that guessed 30%. For those of you that are wanting to make sure you check that, that's obviously something that we hope everyone on the line is also looking at to make sure they have privacy policies across the website, not just on the homepage, but everywhere it should be. Okay, moving forward then, we're going to now look at the technologies or the tags. Now, as we all know, the marketing tech landscape is just exploding to the point now where love our friend Scott Brinker over at Chief Martech. But the visualization, I can't even recognize the logos anymore because they're so small, because there's so many of them. I mean, we're now
at the point where you don't actually know if it's right or wrong, and you almost don't need to.
Yeah, I'm just at this point, it's just blind trust.
They're just pixels.
Actually, no, there's a really good version of this map. So if you want to go over to Chief or martechmap.com, they actually have an interactive version that you can zoom in and look at individual categories and filter. So it's gotten so complex. I remember when I first saw this back in 2010, 2011, and there was several hundred, maybe I don't even think there was 1,000 at that point. And now it continues to explode. And I only see that going up from here. So one of the things we wanted to look at as well, across all those homepages that we looked at, what does the marketing landscape of technologies look like? And this is what we saw. Felice, what did we find as far as tags that we found in by industry?
So average tag, this is just number of tags by industry. The average was 25.6 tags. And the load time, which I don't have a graph for, was about 415 milliseconds.
Load time of the tags, is that right?
Yes. And then the person who or like a company that had the most number of tags was 81 tags by an online retailer.
Wow, and that's 81 just on the homepage, mind you. It wasn't across their whole site. It was just on that one page.
Yes,
wow.
Correct.
Did the page load nicely, or did it load jerkily and poorly?
I didn't actually go look at it.
We're gonna have to check that one.
Yes, we'll find it.
Note of that.
we won't reveal them, but we shall see.
Yeah.
And Felice, was there any correlation between tagging, like number of tags, and like page load speed?
Right. So there's actually a pretty good correlation. Like government, wait a minute. Yes, government. They had fast loading sites and they have fewer tags, like the winner up there. And then holding companies, remember they were very slow.
Mm-hmm.
They're second though. They also have very few tags.
Okay.
So
it's not very,
but not a consistent.
Yeah.
pattern. Okay, and I see software down there at the bottom. That makes me cringe just a little bit, knowing that we all work for software and I've been in it my entire career. But apparently we love putting tags on our websites.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense here that the higher number of tags are the people who, like media, people who are very consumer facing are tracking the most.
Yeah, media, retail, hospitality, telco, very customer facing.
And like
advertising your products when they browse eBay or when they browse Amazon, right? But I'm surprised by software.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'm going to call out again, this is the averages. So there's some high and low on it.
Yeah.
The other slice of data that I kind of pulled in right before the call that I thought was interesting is obviously we're looking at a very large sample. We're looking at over 11,000 websites here. When we narrow that down to just some of the what is it, the 500 or 600 biggest companies on the web, a lot of the brands that we work with directly, you see that average go up to 50 tags per website, and 34 is the median. So there's also this trend that as the smaller the company or the further you get into that long tail, obviously the less complicated or less comprehensive their tech stack is. Is that fair to say?
That's pretty correct. Yeah, we have in the report, we'll break that down by revenue a little bit. And yeah, it tends to be the bigger you are, the more you're doing, more complicated things you're doing.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Now, we also looked at the specific tags that we were finding, just not the aggregate counts. Any specific call outs you had for us here, Felice?
So most common tag, we had, hold on. Google GUA was our most common tag, which we scanned in Q1. So what you're seeing here, we'll get into this a little bit more, but yeah, you see a lot of Google stuff up top.
Yeah, I was going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Yeah.
6 of the top 7 are Google. Another 3 of the next 5 are Facebook. So at least what I would expect as far as some of the usual suspects.
Right. The only thing we wanted to call out here is people who are running Google Global Site and Google Tag Manager.
And we'll get into that in just a second when we look
Okay.
at tag managers. And I also want to talk a little bit about the GUA versus the GA4 split,
Yes,
especially with our Jan 1 stopover. I'm also looking a little bit into that kind of that longer tail. The one that stuck out to me, also a Google property, is Google Optimize, which, if you don't know, is their A/B testing platform. It's also been announced that it's being deprecated, and I think that's coming up as soon as next month or the month after. It's either August or September. Mike, do you know for sure?
Oh, it slipped my mind. I thought it had already gone.
Okay, so whether it's already gone or it's on its way out, I was just surprised to see that there's still so many sites using that technology and haven't moved over to an Optimizely or an Adobe Target, because that is on its way out. So for any of you that are still using Google Optimize, take a look at that. But I do want to drill in a bit to the top of the
yes.
list there and the analytics tags. We mentioned GUA versus GA4.
Yes.
As Felice said, we compiled this data several weeks ago and then put together the report. I actually just did a very brief refresh on this part of the data. One of the things, as we would expect, the number of GA4 accounts has increased. It's actually gone up by a full 50%. So a lot of people just sprinting at the end of that finish line just to get in ahead of the July 1st deadline. Unfortunately, we still see a fair number of people that have Google Universal Analytics on their pages, and some of those that still don't have GA4. So there's people that are definitely going to start having gaps in their data and their measurement strategy. I don't know, Mike, are you hearing anything about kind of what that shift has been like from your side of the world?
Yeah, well, obviously people are, people who were not paying for GA Universal or 360, they will have been panicking up to the deadline, 1st of July. But you'll bear in mind that there are many businesses in our sample size, and they'll have been paying for the paid version of GA 360. So they've actually got another year.
Okay, so maybe some of that's appropriate lag. That's fair enough. Felice, I think you also did a little bit of analysis on how many websites and what proportion are double tagged with multiple analytics technologies, right?
Yes, correct. So 4,140 companies were running at least 2 analytics tags. That's like about 50%. The most number of tags one company was running simultaneously was 5.
5 analytimes tags. That's
Yeah,
a
we
lot
found
of measurement.
only 7 companies had 5 tags.
Okay, fair enough. Not many,
Yeah.
but still, that seems like overkill when it comes to web analytics measurement.
Imagine having 5 different sources of truth that were all different. An analyst's nightmare. My personal nightmare is,
or you just pick the number you like the best.
Which one's the right one?
On that. Yeah. Now, obviously, we see the most double tagging with GUA and GA4.
Yes.
People that are making the migration. That was actually a best practice for a while. At this point, if you haven't started to, and you've made the switch over to GA4, you should start cleaning up those universal tags just so they're not there and leaving residue on your website. We also did see a fair number of folks that are double tagging with Google Analytics and Adobe Analytics. Oftentimes that's people that are paying for Adobe, but using Google as a backup, or different teams. I don't know, Felice, did you have other observations there?
There was only 2.5% who were doing Adobe and GUA.
Okay.
That's like 200 companies. And then at the time of the scan, there was about 3,859 companies running UA and GUA and GA4.
Okay, so a lot of what we'd expect as people migrated for Google Analytics,
right?
Less so with Adobe, but still, a few hundred is nothing to shake a stick at, especially when you're at least paying for one of them, sometimes paying for both. So that's an interesting finding for sure.
Cameron, we do have a question in the chat from Dia Groz. what would be a use case for having multiple analytics tools?
It's a great question. I know from my experience, having worked over at Adobe for a number of years, a lot of times people are using that almost as a backup, especially when you get a tool like Google, when we're using the Google free version. There's not an explicit extra cost. Obviously, there's a cost of ownership there, but using it as a backup measurement in case anything goes down or you have different ways of thinking about the data. I think also quite often you have different teams that are relying on different data. You may have an e-commerce team that relies heavily on a more sophisticated Adobe Analytics measurement package, and then maybe a content team that's just worried about page views and eyeballs, and so they're just using a Google free version. So it's not just double tagging to double check, but oftentimes it's double tagging because you have separate teams reliant on the data separately.
And of course, there is the frequent accidental double tagging where you migrate from one system to another, but your removal of your legacy system was incomplete, and you're actually accidentally double tagging.
That's right. And our audience has probably heard me talk about that a fair number of times, what I call digital residue. It's that leftover tags and technologies that shouldn't be there, but are still lingering in the background. So want to clean those up as best you can. All right. And then as we look at we talked about analytics, but we also wanted to mention tag management. Obviously, Google, once again, a big player in the space. So we do see them at the top of the list. And then some of the usual suspects with Adobe and Telium and Citon and others. Now, Mike, just for the people on the call that don't know the distinction, Google Global Site versus Google Tag Manager. What's the difference there?
Google Tag Manager is, I would say, definitely a more recognized, well-known tag management system. It's been around for a good 10, maybe even 15 years now. Google Global Site Tag, also known as G Tag, is a more recent, kind of simplified single container. So you can essentially implement G Tag, and it will automatically do your AdWords and your analytics for you. That is a gross simplification, but you shouldn't be using both. Or it's very, very, very rare that you should have a good implementation of both together, because they can clash and they can overwrite each other's data objects in essence.
Yeah.
And Felice, you said you saw, did you measure out what that overlap is?
Yes, we found 3,904 companies double tagging with GTag and GTM. So that's not nothing.
Right?
Yeah, that's like more than a third. So,
and that's not an opinion. That's official Google documentation saying you shouldn't be using both, right?
Yeah, Google themselves say that it's in very rare cases should you ever use both, and you should be using one or the other. And typically the way I think about it is, if you're all in on Google technology and that's all you're worried about, use GTag, use the Google Global Site. But as soon as you start pulling in other pieces to your MarTech stack, things that aren't Google technology, you're going to want to move over to Google Tag Manager and retire the Google Global Site. And I think part of what it is people just started with GTag and then never retired it and then started using Tag Manager, and that's where you have the conflation of the two. So definitely an interesting finding. Definitely want our customers to be thinking about that if you're in the Google ecosystem. The last specific tag category that we looked at was consent managers, CMPs. Obviously, this is a big part of what we do as a business, looking at data privacy and consent. What we noticed here, well, Felice, I'll let you talk about it. What were the main findings when we looked at consent managers?
Yeah, so I think it wasn't that surprising. Market leader OneTrust, still the market leader. Something we found when we looked at kind of Europe and North America, it was still OneTrust, except maybe like the third place winner would switch from like TrustArc to something else, which I can't recall right now. But overall, not really surprising.
Yeah, and I think we've worked a ton with OneTrust, and a lot of our customers use them. So I agree, not really surprising. We published a CMP, a more comprehensive CMP report about a year and a half ago, and we saw a similar trend. I think the only thing that's sticking out to me here is that TrustArc has actually moved down one spot. Typically, we see it in second place, but that's also because oftentimes we're looking at only enterprise. And from an enterprise perspective, OneTrust and TrustArc have kind of been number one and number two consistently for years. Whereas somebody like a CookieBot or UserCentrics, and I think CookieBot bought UserCentrics or the other way around. Anyway, there's a lot of these more economical or free tools to do consent that as you start getting into that longer tail of websites, they adopt those before they're ready for an enterprise consent management platform. So I think in general, this follows the trend we'd expect. Also great to see that long tail. I mean, there's what,
I
more
was
than a
going to say,
dozen
Cameron,
on
it's
this.
interesting to
Yes.
see the field become more competitive. I mean, that Termly is a new one to me. Termly at the fourth from the bottom.
Yeah, I've seen Termly before, but I don't even know how to pronounce it. Ayubinda. I'm probably butchering that, and I apologize. But that one's net new to me. I know the folks over at Didomi, for example, have been heavy in France and Europe, but hadn't had a presence here in the United States until just recently. And we love to see them entering this market as well. So just in general, I think consent management, building out data privacy has become important. And part of that is because we've seen shifts in the market. One of the things I want to call out is just here in the United States, for example, we are now up to 10 state level laws that have been passed and signed into law, several of which are in effect. We know that, for example, Connecticut and Colorado just went into effect on July 1st. I talked about how important that day was for our market. We know that the CPPA, the new governing body for California law, has now enforcement authority as of July 1st. So that's a big shift. And then just last week, the state that I grew up in, Oregon, has passed a data privacy law to become number 11, and they're just waiting on the governor's signature there. So we continue to see this map change, honestly, almost on a weekly basis, and that's just here in the United States. Mike, what are you seeing overseas and especially in Europe?
Well, you've shown us a bit on a state by state basis, but you are a United States. We've seen on the 2nd of July, there was essentially the US. You'll be aware, some of you will be aware that US and EU have been having a back and forth with their data privacy framework for about the last 10 years. We're now kind of onto the 3rd iteration, finessing of that framework. And on the 2nd of July, the US, announced that they had come to a proposal that would work in their opinion for both the US and the EU. And then the EU ratified it just 2 days ago. So in theory, we've now got both of those governing bodies basically saying, yes, we have agreed to ways that we can share data. We've agreed to essentially an oversight committee, almost like an appeals committee, so that it's almost like a court where they can say, actually, does the US have the right to take data? Actually, there was an appeal from a European citizen. And that was really the source of the friction now. But almost immediately, we did get movement from NOYB, so none of your business. That is the Max Schrems' privacy organization. And their opinion, the legal opinion and pushback is almost immediately that the new framework is actually broadly a rehash with an additional layer of subjective oversight. So ultimately, we'll see where this goes. It's a developing story, but a lot of people, in my space, in digital space, we've seen this a lot on LinkedIn, and it'll be interesting to watch this 3rd iteration probably go get taken to court by Max Schrems and his team. Other things that might be of interest to our listeners is recently there was a Spotify decision regarding Spotify being fined. And the background to this case is that they essentially they have a DSAR software, so that's a data subject access request. But it seems the detail of it or the ease of communication was not quite up to scratch. So according to the decision, this is europa.eu, this is one of the kind of publication sites for the European decisions. It seems to stress either that the DSAR was incomplete. So this stresses that you do need to do data discovery. Many organizations think they know what data they know about a customer. So when they pass it to a customer, they think their job is done. But in fact, the job is incomplete because they didn't do a complete case of a data discovery. Again, that's where an observable audit comes in. But the second part appears to be focusing on personal data that is difficult to understand, such as those of a technical nature, may need to be explained, not only in English, but in the individual's own native language. So it might be, bringing this to the attention of all our audience, all our listeners, that actually your DSAR might not be complete. So have a look at this decision and see if it changes what you need to do, what you need to include, and how you need to present your data subject access request response.
There's nothing quite as nice as hearing people say you are adequate. I think that's the nicest thing I've had anybody from Europe ever say about me.
I've been told I'm adequate before, but then to get shot down within hours is generally doesn't happen that quickly. But yeah, and the Spotify decision, interestingly, also they basically said that given Spotify's size, given that it was a minor infringement, they said, okay, we'll only fine you, 5 million euros or whatever that number was, 58 million Corona, which is 5 million euros. So
that's nothing.
They're being nice, only 5 million.
But I think that goes to show that it's one thing to always be in compliance. And I think as digital properties, as websites change continually, you always see things that slide out of compliance. But if you're saying, well, I'm making an effort and here's the receipts and here's what I've done, and since you told me, here's the things that I've done to remediate those problems, I think you're going to get a lot lighter treatment by the governing bodies than if, for example, and I don't know the exact details on this from, for example, the Sephora case here in the US, but you were told to do it, you did nothing, you just completely ignored us. You're going to get a bigger fine in those cases. And if you can say, hey, I've now used tools like Observe Point and others to go in, to find the problems, to address them. I think that's the key part, is to continually move.
One of our customers actually consulted with the ICO to check that Observe Point would meet those requirements. Mm-hmm. I only found out about that today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The ICO being the UK's data protection authority, just for clarification.
All right, we're getting close on time, but there was a couple of other key insights we just wanted to quickly review with the group. As we know, with data privacy, it's not just about the technologies that are running on your site, but it's the type of data they're collecting and how they're collecting them. Cookies have been front and center in a lot of the consent managers, so it's definitely something we wanted to hit on. Anything you wanted to call out here, Felice, as far as the cookies that we found?
Yes, so average number of cookies was 17.75.
Okay.
Which is pretty good. The most number of cookies we found was from a retailer, 274.
Oh, 274.
Yes.
And was that like the only outlier? Were there others that were near that?
There were some people in the 200s and 196 that were in the media and internet companies.
Okay, so definitely quite a bit happening on specific websites for all the different technologies they're tracking.
Yeah, and then the top 25 were between 139 to the 274. They were in like retail, media, the manufacturing subcategories of like food and bev, household goods, some transportation like a cruise,
right?
Hospitality, restaurant, really consumer facing.
Consumer facing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And to compare that with, I mentioned that this is kind of a broad sample. When we talk about just the top several hundred, the Observe Point customers that we've worked with, the median's around 66. So as we'd expect, a bit larger, the larger the company you are, the more technologies and tags you have on the site, but still worth noting. Now, it's not just the total number of cookies. I don't know that it's a good or bad as far as where that number lands, but there are certain things about cookies that you want to pay attention to. One of the primary things we look at is it first versus third party? And I love this visualization because it's super simple as far as, am I over or under 50%? For me, that has just kind of become the natural gut check as far as if a site is over 30% third party, that's when you really should start looking at, am I doing this right? Especially knowing that there are a portion of browsers out there that block third party by default and have done so for years. So even in this case, it looks like your number is 46.5% are third party just across the board. That means that for between 20 and 30% of these websites traffic that's going through a Safari, that's going through Firefox, that's going through non-Chrome browsers, that this is a significant exposure. Am I missing anything there?
No, you're right. 100%.
And as we break that down further, it's not just third party cookies are bad or good, but you do want to watch that balance. But I think the other things you were looking into were specifically, what does that breakdown look like in different markets? Tell me what you found there.
Right. So we in the report we'll go further into the markets, but here I just wanted to call out Europe is actually doing much better on the third party cookies at slightly over 30% here. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see the US.
Oh, I think we pulled that out one for the.
Oh, you did.
But we did want to highlight that Europe, compared to the rest of the world,
less than average. Yeah,
a much better job. So 46.5% third party for the whole sample. Europe pulls that down to just over a third.
Correct.
So, Mike, your folks over there on that side of the pond are doing a good job.
We're proud. We're proud of the work we're doing.
Do we?
I would call it adequate. Let's use that.
Wait. If this lasts for another day, I will be breaking a record.
Felice, did you have something else?
Did we have a poll question on this one, or did we?
I think we did. The third-party cookie split, Ryan.
Or was it tags? I don't remember.
What percentage of cookies do you think are third party? So the folks online and on the show thought it was, 30, 40%, somewhere right in there. So pretty accurate as well. So
good.
We've got some, I don't know if they're just really good guesses or people that are really close to our midpoint there, but that's good to see.
Nice.
We can guarantee you it's not insiders that we've planted who are watching this webinar who already know the answers.
That's right. The last thing I want to finish on here is, and especially with cookies, is there are certain things about cookies when they're set and implemented that present potential risk. I'm not going to say they're always bad, but they do present potential risk. One is the cookie secure or not? And typically, if we see more than 50% unsecured, that's a bad thing. Any unsecure cookies or non-secure cookies you should know about. But it is worth noting that in the sample size, it was about a 60-40 split. We also looked at HTTP only. Mike, for those listening in that aren't clear on what is the HTTP only setting?
I believe that's where a cookie can only be read by essentially an HTTP protocol call. You couldn't read an HTTP only cookie, which is set to true, with say an API call or some kind of other protocol, maybe like an FTP protocol, for example. Yep.
So it opens you up to more issues if that's set to false. And unfortunately, we saw a very large percentage of the cookies in the sample that were set to false. So something to be aware of and to look into. And then finally, the percentage of cookies that have a same site setting of none as opposed to strict or lax. Mike, do you have just a real quick abbreviated description of what that means?
No, you're really testing me now. So functionally, it means that only, well, kind of in the name really, the same site can read the cookie. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm going to stop there. Yeah,
it's the ability, and when it's none, it means there's other sites or other sources can start to read that cookie as well. So all three of those taken together. So we talked about non-secure, we talked about HTTP only, and we talked about same site. When you look at those, no one set of those is always bad, but it's always good to be aware of them because they can present security risk. Really where I find the most interesting thing is when you have cookies that are all three of those things at the same time. That's what I've started calling the egregious cookies. I don't know if anybody else didn't pick that up, but I'm trying to make fetch happen here. So as far as the egregious cookies, Felice, wrap us up here. What did you find there?
Well, you'll be happy to know that 81% of the 11,000 homepages had egregious cookies.
I'll be happy to know that.
We can help them.
Yes, we can help. Yeah, and that's not to say that 81% of all cookies were egregious, but 81% of all 11,000 homepages had at least one that were. So I think that's a great call out. Something we want to end on here is just making sure you understand what's happening. A lot of times when we work with customers, it's not this one thing that we found is absolutely good or absolutely bad. It simply is, this is what it is. And if it's falling outside of the standards you have for your company, you're going to want to look deeply into that. All right. To wrap up, Mike, was there any other questions that came through in the chat pod? I know you bounced a few as we were going through. Anything that we missed?
No, just that one question from Dia Gross. So hopefully we answered your question, Dia. No, no more questions. We have a quiet group today, but thank you to everybody who responded to the poll, and hopefully it was a bit fun, a bit interactive.
Fantastic. All right, we've definitely filled up more than enough of your time, Felice. We want to thank you for joining us today. If people want to get a hold of you or learn more about the research you've done, where can they find you online?
Just find me on LinkedIn.
Find you on LinkedIn. And as far as the report itself, what are we expecting as far as distribution and availability?
We'll be emailing it out. We're still working on the finishing touches of beautifying the graphs, so we will be emailing everyone shortly, probably this week.
Fantastic. Well, we definitely appreciate all the hard work you put into this. I know this has been hours and hours and days of work.
A labor of love.
Some super awesome insights and insights that aren't just based on people's here's what I think or here's my opinion, but actual hard data that ObservePoint's in a good position.
It was nice to know that people's opinions, our voters, vaguely were in line with the data. So no one the 8 people that voted are not massively deluded.
That's right. All right. Well, thank you so much, Felice. Mike, before we sign off, anything further from you for our audience?
No, it's thank you for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Yep. Appreciate it. So from all of us at Observe Point, thanks so much. And we'll see you next time on DataChat Live.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.